All right, guys, we are so close to getting this car started. Today we're going to work on getting the back pressure sensor all plumbed up to the header, get the wiring ran for the sensor. I've got some of the power and grounds for the alternator and the starter that we'll try to get installed. I am waiting on one more part that should be here tomorrow, and that's the factory bracket for like the ground that goes on the starter that bolts to the bell housing. So when I get that in, I'll be able to install the last ground on that, but for now we'll get everything that I do have ran. We'll get the back pressure sensor all wired up and installed, and we'll take you on that journey. For some of the parts and materials that we'll be working with today, I've got some 1/4-inch piping. I want to say this is like a combination of nickel and some other material. It bends a lot easier than stainless, so if you ever need to flare this, you can without it splitting. I'll put up on the screen exactly what kind of material this is, but that's what we're using today, 1/4-inch. We've got a pressure sensor, so this goes up to, actually no, this is a 10 bar map sensor. So we'll be able to read vacuum and pressure on that. We've got the Rife canister, so this is to kind of dampen the pulses on the exhaust, so that way we can maintain an accurate reading on what the pressure is. We've got the tube bender for when we're making 90-degree angles or whatever other angles we need. I've got some DR25 that will be used for the wiring side, and then we've got the 1/4-inch compression to 1/8-inch NPT. So one of these will plug thread into the adapter that we've got on the header, and then the other side will go on the bottom of here, and then we'll run this piping between the two. Sensor goes on the top, and then we'll get that wired up. One thing I did notice on these fittings is the inside channel doesn't really go that deep. As far as 1/4-inch goes, they have it like stepping down, so I've got a 1/4-inch bit that will drill out, not all the way through, but at least halfway through the nut, so that way we've got pretty good penetration with the piping, and we'll get that to seal properly. So, sit back, we'll take you through the journey. Alright, so first things first, I'm going to go ahead and get the NPT fittings and the sensor threaded into here. We do want to use Teflon on here so it seals. We will not use Teflon on the header aspect, we'll just use some ARP torque lube, and we'll get that tightened up. Hopefully we won't have any leaks there, but the Teflon would actually melt on the header, so we don't want to use that. I did 3D print a socket out of plastic that we use for the combo sensor, so you can kind of thread the wire through the hole and then torque this down. Should be the same aspect on here. Just so we don't mar up the sensor. There we go. That's good. Find out what the... So I actually did drill out one of these already. I'm just going to find the right one. This is a stainless fitting, so we don't really have to worry about marring this up. Alright, so that's good to go. Get this installed in the car. Alright, so I did use some thread certs on the frame rail. So I've got those already in the frame rail. You've probably seen that in one of our last videos. I did get this module also moved, so we don't have anything hanging from the top of this and here. So I just basically drilled and tapped that, and also put a thread cert so it sits there nicely. Won't have any issues. You can see down here, that's where the front O2 typically goes. I've got that adapter in there to give us 1/8-inch NPT, and the piping will run basically from that port to the pressure sensor. Alright, so for these fittings, I am going to drill out the rest of them. We're not drilling it all the way, just enough so we can put the piping through there. So technically I only needed one of these, but I drilled out two just in case. Alright, so you can see the port on the header. I'm just going to thread the NPT in there, but first I'm going to put some ARP torque lube on there and then cinch that down. So I went ahead and put some ARP torque lube on here. So we should be able to get that installed in the header. All right, we're good there. Now we're gonna start fabbing up the piping and get that bent up as we want. Bend that a little bit out of the way so it's not touching the plastic, because it will melt that. And then what I want to do is I kind of want to curl this up a little bit, get at least a few rotations so that way it's got some travel distance to dissipate the heat. So we'll mark this out and then we'll use a jig to kind of round that, and I'll show you what that looks like. So ideally what you want to find is something round that you can use to kind of wrap it around. And for me, I'm going to use the vacuum extension. So I'm going to put this in the vise just so it doesn't go anywhere. Wrap it down just a little bit. And orient this how I had it, which was basically like this. And then just kind of rotate this around. And that should be good. So that's how you get your coil in there nice and uniform. And we'll get this back in the car. We'll bend this, articulate it as we need, which I think is gonna have to go upwards, but I just wanna make sure the exit point is where we need it, and then we'll get it installed. All right, so we got this in the car and we kind of got it mocked up like this. So that'll go into the header and this will go up into the sensor. I did mark this, so we'll go ahead and get this cut. And then we'll kind of manipulate this and massage it as we need to get that to fit. So basically with the pipe cutter, just tighten that up, keep spinning it. So we're good there. So we'll get this in the car, kind of bend this as we need to, and we'll get it all wrapped up. All right, so this is kind of what we're working with. I want to say I've got both collars in there, so just kind of thread that in there, tighten that up a bit. And we're a little off, so hardware is plumbed, just gotta do the wiring and then we're good there. All right, so for me to be able to properly get to the wiring and do it the way I need, I do have to remove the turbo again. So we'll get that taken out. That'll free up all this space when I get to the wiring harness, and we'll be able to get that wrapped up as we need. So Now we got all this room for the wiring harness. Probably gonna remove a lot of that electrical tape so that way I can re-tape it with the other tape that I like to use, that fabric tape. All right, so we got the tape removed. Again, the whole idea behind removing the electrical tape is it serves no real purpose other than aesthetically pleasing. And it's really not, because it gets heated tremendously by the exhaust. It starts to melt, it gets everything sticky, and it just creates a huge mess. So removing all the electrical tape, we're gonna be using that Tessa tape, which is that fabric tape, which is a lot more heat resistant, and we're going to try to cover these wires up as best we can with some DR25, maybe even some more heat sleeve. But we got to get this cut terminated. This is actually the factory MAF wiring. We're not running a MAF anymore, so I have repurposed these wires, not all of them, but only 3 of them. So we'll plumb that right into the back pressure sensor. All right, so I wasn't quite sure if my DR25 was going to be large enough for all these wires, but it looks like it will be, just barely. If I had 3/8, that probably would have been better, but that's the size I did run out of. So what I could do is I did reuse the shielded wire because it's shielded. I may look at my wiring schematic and see if I can not use that one, because that is what's adding a lot of the thickness. So if I can cut this one back and leave it unterminated, we should be good. So I'm gonna review these wires one more time, see if I can change them up. I wanna say there is one more signal wire that I could use. I know one's 5 volts, one's ground. So let me double check, I'll be right back. All right, so I was able to move some wiring around on the M-Tron. So I can get rid of the larger shielded wire, and then this one, which is 12 volts. Don't need that for the sensor since it's only 5 volts. So we've got 5 volt, sensor ground, and then signal for the pressure. So these are the only 3 wires that we need. I'll get these chopped up a little bit, probably down lines around here somewhere. I'll sheathe this, and then we'll cut and terminate onto that. And then we'll work on getting the main harness all wrapped up with the Tessa tape. And then I've got some loom, split loom, that I like to use in situations like that. Ideally, I would depin the connector and put some DR25 or that insotherm on there, but this time around, we're not gonna worry about going through all that. I'm gonna wipe these wires down just to get all the adhesive off. All right, so I've got the sensor sleeved. I also have the, what I believe is the wheel speed sensor, also sleeved up and made it back to the factory connector. So now I'm gonna bundle up the factory wiring with some Tessa tape, just loosely to keep it nice and together. And then I'll put some of the other sleeve, split sleeving that I have to kind of dress everything up. And then do the ends and every so often with the Tessa tape, just keep it all together, and that should wrap up the wiring on that, with the exception of terminating this to the oxygen sensor. All right, so we got all of the wiring wrapped up. We've got the back pressure all finished up and ran with the wiring and the tubing. So we got it plumbed up to the header and then underneath the canister. So that way it's got some travel distance to dissipate the heat. And then we've got this wired up to the factory math wiring. And then I did refinish the main connector or main harness and got that all taped up. And we also got the lambda control O2 sensor all plumbed up and wired up. So we are good to go. Everything is wrapped up. Just got to put the turbo back in, bolt up the exhaust, the oil drain, and then we can work on plumbing the wastegate lines. We've got two here, one on the turbo going to the 4-port boost solenoid, and then we can work on the power and ground wires for the alternator. Hoping the adapter or the bolt that goes right here for the ground, hoping that arrives tomorrow at the dealership so I can pick that up, and then we can get that ran to the battery for the ground, and then obviously the alternator 12 volts going over there. All that's going to be 0 gauge, and then I also got to pick up 2 new braided grounds for the underside for the heads, and we'll get that all wrapped up.